My name is Patricia, and I was 29 years old when I believed I had found my soulmate, Keith. Our romance felt like a dream spun in fast forward. From the moment we met, there was an undeniable spark, and within just a year, that spark became a blazing fire that culminated in our whirlwind wedding. Keith, an accountant with an easygoing charm, stood tall not just in stature but in the way his infectious laughter seemed to echo warmth wherever he went. In contrast, I had a quieter passion. I worked in digital marketing during the week, and on weekends, I would lose myself in painting, letting the swirls of color on my canvas express what words sometimes could not. Keith and I were opposites in many ways. I was meticulous, the type of person who wrote detailed lists and reveled in crossing off tasks with satisfaction. Keith, however, thrived on spontaneity, finding joy in last-minute plans and embracing life's surprises. Our differences seemed to balance each other out perfectly, or at least that's what I thought. The day after our wedding, I stood in our cozy living room, surrounded by the joyful remnants of the celebration. Stacks of unopened gifts and envelopes cluttered every surface, creating a beautiful chaos. It was a tangible reminder of the love and excitement we had just experienced. Keith and I had planned to spend the morning opening these treasures together, but before we could get started, his parents, Judy and Logan, arrived unannounced. Judy and Logan were a lively pair. Our quick engagement and wedding meant I hadn't spent much time getting to know them, but they had seemed pleasant enough during our few interactions. Judy was impeccably dressed, her sharp eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and appraisal. Logan, her jovial counterpart, seemed content to follow her lead, his booming laughter punctuating her observations. "Oh, what a lovely mess," Judy said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she stepped inside. "We thought we'd stop by and help you two go through everything." Though their offer seemed kind, there was an assertiveness in her tone that made it clear this wasn't really a question. Keith welcomed them warmly, as he always did, and soon we were gathered in the living room, unwrapping gifts. It wasn't long before Judy's keen interest in our presents became evident. Her eyes lit up as we unwrapped a crystal vase from my Aunt Kelly. The intricate design caught the light, casting rainbows on the walls. "Is that a crystal vase?" Judy asked, leaning in and picking it up without hesitation. She held it up to the light, examining it as though she were appraising a rare artifact. "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?" I replied, forcing a smile while silently willing her to put it back. "It is," she said thoughtfully, turning it in her hands. Then, with an air of nonchalance, she added, "We can find a good place for this at our house." I blinked, caught off guard. Surely, she was joking. I glanced at Keith, hoping he would say something, but he was preoccupied with a set of intricate kitchen tools from his cousin. I gave him a pleading look, but he only chuckled. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," he said lightly, his tone making it seem as though the situation was a harmless joke. "Oh, come on," Logan chimed in, his tone warm but firm. "It'll just gather dust here, we'll use it." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer," I said, attempting to assert myself without causing a scene. Judy's expression shifted subtly, her surprise quickly giving way to a hint of annoyance. "Patricia, you need to learn to share," she said with a tone that was equal parts chiding and patronizing. "We're family now, and families help each other out." Her words stung, but I swallowed my frustration. Keith, sensing the tension, jumped in quickly. "Let's not worry about this now," he said, his easygoing nature smoothing over the moment. "We've got plenty of gifts to go through." I nodded, letting the matter drop for the sake of peace, but the discomfort lingered. As the morning wore on, Judy and Logan continued to comment on various items, casually suggesting which ones might find a better home with them. I felt as though pieces of my new life were being claimed by strangers while Keith stood by, either oblivious or unwilling to step in. The first year of our marriage passed in a blur of adjustments and compromises. I learned to navigate life as a newlywed, balancing my work, hobbies, and the complexities of merging families. As our first anniversary approached, I wanted to mark the occasion with something special. Keith and I had always loved a quaint restaurant called Chez Louis. With its warm ambience and exquisite cuisine, I decided to make a reservation there and, in a gesture of goodwill, invited Judy and Logan to join us. When we arrived that evening, Judy and Logan were already seated at the table, flipping through the menus. Judy looked up as we approached, her sharp eyes taking in the restaurant's elegant decor. "This place is fancy," she remarked, her tone walking the line between admiration and disapproval. Keith gave my hand a gentle squeeze under the table, a silent thank you for the effort I had made. I smiled, hoping this dinner would be a step toward bridging the gaps and strengthening our family bonds. As the evening unfolded, I clung to that hope, even as subtle tensions simmered beneath the surface. To be continued. I felt obligated, but where does that leave us, Keith? I pressed, leaning forward to catch his eye. What about our marriage? He didn't respond immediately. In the pause that followed, a wave of fear washed over me. Perhaps we weren't as solid as I had believed. Perhaps our foundation was less rock and more sand, easily eroded by the steady tide of his parents' needs and wants. It's supposed to be us against the world, Keith, not me against you and them, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside me. Keith looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the conflict warring within him. I know, Patricia, I just don't know how to make everyone happy, he admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. That's just it, I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. We can't always make everyone happy, but we made vows to each other. Keith, doesn't that count for something? He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before finally meeting mine. It does, he said softly, it counts for a lot. The rest of the meal passed in contemplative silence, a shift from the strained quiet that had become our norm. It felt as though my words had either planted a seed or perhaps watered one that had been lying dormant within Keith all this time. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, but its warmth seemed absent from our home. I awoke to an unsettling quiet, the other side of the bed untouched from the night before. The emptiness of the house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its silence. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, bracing for the usual lack of messages, a silent testament to the growing distance between us. Instead, my screen was flooded with notifications, all from my bank. A lump formed in my throat as I read the details, multiple transactions, including airline tickets. My heart sank. As I sat in the quiet of the early morning, more notifications lit up my phone, revealing an undeniable truth. Hotel bookings and a pair of airline tickets to Venice had been purchased under my account while I was asleep. The timestamps on the emails indicated that the flight had already departed, hours ago. Keith and his parents had embarked on the Venetian getaway that was supposed to be ours, financed by the bonus I had worked so hard to earn. A wave of disbelief washed over me, quickly turning into anger and a profound sense of betrayal. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I processed the truth. Keith, the man I had trusted with everything, had used my trust against me. The evidence was clear, digital transactions laid bare his deceit. With trembling hands, I dialed his number, though I knew he wouldn't answer, not with the time difference and certainly not with the echoes of our last confrontation still hanging between us. When his voicemail beeped, its cheerfulness felt almost taunting. Keith, I saw the charges, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You took your parents to Venice using my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything. The house felt colder and emptier after the call, the walls closing in on me, heavy with the weight of unspoken words and now likely words that would never be spoken. I sat at the kitchen table, enveloped by silence, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. With a resolute heart, I began canceling the hotel rooms, the return flights, and every part of the trip tied to my finances. With each cancellation, it felt as though a part of my former life was slipping away. The future I had envisioned dissolved before my eyes. Once everything was undone, I took definitive steps to sever financial ties. I contacted the bank and removed Keith's access to my accounts, each click a mix of fear and liberation. The man I had married, the family I had tried to integrate into, they were now strangers. Strangers who had exploited my generosity instead of cherishing it. With mechanical precision, I packed my bags. Each item tucked away was a reminder of a dream that needed to be shelved. There was no possibility of returning to what was. No apology could mend the breach his actions had caused. Keith had made his choice clear, and in doing so, he had determined my path as well. The wedding ring, once a symbol of our commitment, now felt cold and heavy in my palm. I left it on the counter, its sparkle mocking the morning light. With one final glance at the life I was leaving behind, I shut the door on what was never truly a home. By late afternoon, I was on the road, my car filled with clothes and essentials, each item a stark reminder of how swiftly my life had changed. As I drove, my phone began to buzz with messages. One was from Keith, several were from his mother. I pulled over to read them, knowing they would only strengthen my resolve. Keith's message was simple. "Patricia, please, we need to talk about this, can't we just discuss it?" His words rang hollow, almost insulting in their simplicity. I started to type a reply but stopped. No words could bridge the gulf between us now. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and attempts to justify their actions, but they too fell on deaf ears. The decision was made, and the chapter was closed. As I drove toward a new beginning, amidst the shock and hurt, I turned my phone off, leaving Keith's mother's desperate messages unanswered. They were halfway around the world, enjoying the sights of Venice on a trip funded by deceit. They could sort out their own accommodations. My first move was to secure my finances. At the bank, the manager, a compassionate middle-aged woman, greeted me warmly. "I need to ensure my husband can no longer access my accounts," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded with understanding. "Let's make sure you're fully protected." By the time I left the bank, I felt a renewed sense of control. My accounts were secure, and with a resolute mind, I drove to the only place I felt I could truly relax, my sister's house. Isabella opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a comforting embrace. "Patricia, I've been so worried," she said, her concern palpable. As we sat at her kitchen table, she listened intently while I recounted everything. Her disbelief turned to anger. "You deserve so much better," she asserted, squeezing my hand. I nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I know, that's why I'm not going back. I've cancelled everything and left the house. I'm done," I declared. From that moment, my resolve hardened. I began the process of filing for divorce, each step a decisive move toward reclaiming my life. The wedding ring, left behind on the counter, was the last tangible tie to a marriage that had been irrevocably broken. Keith's messages continued to arrive for a while, apologies, pleas, and eventually, expressions of anger, but I left them unread, floating in the digital void as I moved forward. The apartment I rented was modest but filled with sunlight. I decorated it with plants, filled the shelves with books, and began making new memories. I enrolled in courses, reigniting a passion for learning I had neglected for too long. One tranquil evening, as I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea in hand, I finally deleted Keith's number from my phone. It was a symbolic gesture but one that felt deeply cathartic. I was truly free, free to heal, free to grow, and most importantly, free to be unapologetically myself. With each new day, I felt more empowered, embracing the endless possibilities that lay ahead.